Good evening. Good evening. All right. Welcome to What Just Happened, Midterm Elections 2022. I'm Kevin McCory, News Director here at KYW. But seriously, what just happened? Well, we're in luck because we're sure to get some answers tonight as part of a great conversation about among some of the most knowledgeable and connected people in the state of Pennsylvania when it comes to political analysis. Before we start, though, I want to thank you. It takes a smart and engaged electorate to get the democracy that we deserve. And it speaks volumes that you are here tonight willing to take time out of your busy lives to join us to figure out how to process this election. So with you all here, we're in good company tonight. And as someone who has devoted much of his life to the pursuit of truth, to creating stories and conversation that reflect the fabric of our lives, it means a lot to me personally that you're here. This event speaks to the heart of KYW's mission, and we're thankful for our partnership with the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia to be able to host it. Every day, the journalists in our newsroom gather to try to capture the story of our region, from the beating heart news and information that we need to live our lives, to the deeper grassroots reporting that helps us better understand the people and power structures all around us. This event, unpacking the ramifications of Election Day, will help us all make meaning. The KYW newsroom is especially proud of the work we did in the lead up to this election to keep our region informed of the facts and perspectives driving the political season. It culminated for us on election night, where we presented 6 hours of all live, all local special coverage of the races as they unfolded with veteran journalists across the state on many angles of the story. At the helm of it all was our own Ian Bush, who will guide the conversation tonight. But before we get to Ian, I'd like to welcome Haley Boyle, Vice President of Programs at the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased that the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia is back here again with KYW News Radio in your studios at Odyssey headquarters. We were last here earlier this year in March to discuss the Russian war in Ukraine that had just broken out weeks prior. We are honored to be working together again in partnership to share on another important and timely event, this time the U.S. midterm elections. For over 70 years, the Council has brought our community fresh, nonpartisan, and civil discourse on the critical issues affecting the world, and tonight's program is no different. We are a world affairs experience provider, connecting Philadelphia to the world, encouraging civil discourse, and striving to help people make sense of both global and local issues. And we couldn't do any of that without all of you, our members, supporters, and friends. So thank you for coming out tonight to be with us. We are also delighted to be able to offer programs like this via live stream, and I welcome anyone tuning in virtually via KYW's Facebook Live. A few final notes for tonight's event. Please find our digital program book by using the QR codes that are posted throughout the room, on the tables, and at the registration desk when you first came in, or on the Council's website. We're also on social media. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and use hashtag WACPHL. Our format tonight is a moderated discussion among panelists, and there will be time at the end to take questions from you, our audience. Please remember to wait for a staff member who will bring you a microphone so that everyone here and online can hear your question. Masks are optional tonight, and we encourage you to wear them if you're more comfortable doing so, and we thank you for your partnership. I'd now like to introduce our moderator and panel. First, it's my pleasure to welcome Lauren Mayk, a reporter from NBC 10 News, where she has been reporting since 2015. She has covered a variety of assignments, but is most passionate about reporting on politics and had the honor of interviewing all 4 of the major candidates for president and vice president in 2016. Lauren has also previously worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Sarasota Herald Tribune, and WFLA TV News Channel 8 in Florida. We're delighted to have her join us tonight, share her insight and expertise, and as she's had special opportunities in the months leading up to this past Tuesday's election to also speak with candidates and individuals voting in this most recent election. I next have the honor of introducing the Honorable Jim Cawley. Just recently, it was announced that Jim would step into the role of president of Rosemont College, where he had previously served as in an interim capacity since June. Jim was Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania from 2011 to 2015 under Republican Governor Tom Corbett, and in February 2015 joined the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey as its CEO. He led the United Way for 2.5 years before joining Temple, and at Temple was Vice President of Institutional Advancement. Jim, we're delighted to have you with us this evening. Finally, I am delighted to introduce Lauren Swartz, President and CEO at the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia, and whom I have the pleasure of working with on a day-to-day basis. Lauren previously worked for the City of Philadelphia as Deputy Commerce Director of International Business and Global Strategy, during which time she focused on global business attraction, foreign direct investment, and promoting exports for the region and the local economy. Lauren has also served as Deputy Director of Trade at the Trade Association Food Export USA Northeast, working to promote U.S. exports in over 40 countries around the world. She's hosted delegations, diplomats, business and trade investors from all around the world in her many roles, and continues to promote international in Philadelphia in all that she does. Our moderator for today's discussion is Ian Bush, anchor, reporter, news editor, and technology editor here at KYW News Radio. Ian's passion for radio started in his youth and has continued to build upon his expertise at every juncture, from anchoring local news at WDIY-FM, an NPR affiliate in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania during high school and undergrad in Villanova, and has been named one of National Radio's 30 Under 30 by Edison Media Research, to joining the air staff at KYW News Radio in 2005. We're honored to have such a versatile broadcaster to moderate today's discussion, and Ian's lifelong passion for and career in radio has shaped him into a keen interviewer. I turn the microphone over to you, Ian, and thank you all for being with us.
Thanks, Haley. I know it's boring to hear about other people's dreams, but I really would like help analyzing this one I had on Sunday night after a weekend spent at the Radnor Library preparing for our election night coverage. So I'm in Dr. Oz's adopted hometown of Burnett in Montgomery County. And as I'm wont to do, I find myself in an ice cream shop. I tried kind after kind after kind, and I thought, all right, I'll settle on a scoop of blueberry and a scoop of red raspberry. But then the owner emerges with a slice of cake and said, try this. She shoves it onto my face like we were a couple at our wedding reception. Now, from the little taste I got, it turns out it was the cake that I really craved the whole time. But I'd had so much ice cream, I was already full. So what does this mean? Do I long for a strong third party but end up voting Republican or Democrat regardless? Or do I just really like sweets? I may have answered both questions because yesterday I bought a pint of wild berry lavender ice cream, which is pretty perfect for purple Pennsylvania. We woke up this morning to the reality that this second day after the election, there's no clear winner in terms of which party will control things in Pennsylvania's capital or on Capitol Hill. In Pennsylvania, Democrats believe they've pulled off the improbable for the first time in a dozen years, captured the state house, though there are several races that haven't been called, including in Bucks County, where the Republican incumbent leads by, how's this for every vote counting, 2 votes. So at the moment, it's 100 to 100. Dems have notched a net gain of 10 seats. Joanna McClinton hopes to become the first woman Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania history. In the state Senate, Republicans will hold on to their majority as Democrat Josh Shapiro is sworn in as governor. On Capitol Hill, you need 218 seats for a majority in the House. Republicans have 209 to Democrats 189, according to the Associated Press about 10 minutes ago. Republicans need a net gain of 5 seats to take control. They continue to trend in that direction. Kevin McCarthy is waiting in the wings to take the Speaker's gavel. In the Senate, you'll know that 3 races are lacking a winner. Georgia, where a runoff will be held early next month. Nevada, where state law allows mail-in ballots that are postmarked by Election Day to be received through Saturday. So there's a lot of votes still to be counted there, and there's a heck of a lot of votes in Arizona. 600,000 ballots to be counted, the majority in Metro Phoenix. So should Arizona and Nevada both go to Republicans or to Democrats, that's the party in power in the Senate. No need to sweat that runoff in the Peach State. So while this midterm was not the dreamiest of scenarios for Democrats, it was far from a nightmare for them. And Republicans might be doing a bit more tossing and turning over their performance in an election where history and headwinds were in their favor. So let's talk about what happened and why and what's to come. And this fantastic panel promises not to put you to sleep. Just by way of kicking us off tonight, let's go down the line and hear your biggest surprise of Election Day.
Starting over here. My biggest surprise is that we have results already in the Senate race. I was preparing to work through the week without having those results in the Senate race, with counts still coming in, and the fact that we had them that night, that was the biggest surprise to me.
Ian, when I first heard the question, I thought to myself, is this guy kidding? Virtually everything in this election was a surprise. It was a bad night to be a pollster. That's one thing for sure. Bad night to be an election denier. And I think that certainly the one you already mentioned that to me is the most shocking, and it comes from my experiences in state government. The fact that the Democrats are close. I do not agree with their assessment that they already have the majority, but that they are so close. Nobody predicted that. Nobody saw that coming. So it was an extraordinary night, I think, in its complexities, because there were different things that were happening. I would mention I live in that state house district that Ian mentioned, that actually right now the Republican is down 2, but there are several, and it was an open seat because the person serving in that seat ran for the state Senate and won quite handily. So that too is a bit of a surprise. There were surprises abounding, and I know we're probably going to talk about a great many more of them as we go on, but certainly the Democrats being in position to take the majority in the state house is quite astonishing.
One of the biggest surprises for me is how quickly the Republican Party nationally seems to have moved away from MAGA and Trump. And DeSantis' speech is one example of that, but just in conversation, the shift has been quick. And we'll see what happens with whatever Mr. Trump would like to tell us on November 14th and how everyone responds to that.
And we'll certainly talk more about the Trump effect. My biggest surprise, I think, in the opposite of what Lauren Mayk said, how the results are not in the Arizona governor's race, just from the sheer amount of national attention, national coverage the Republican candidate, the TV news anchor Carrie Lake, former TV news anchor Carrie Lake got. I guess I suppose she'd just easily walk away with it, but I was surprised yesterday morning to wake up, and that was the first thing I checked after our election coverage, to see not only had the race not been called, but the Democrat was in the lead, Democrat Katie Hobbs. Now, as I say, there's a lot of counting still to be done, and this very well could change, but I wonder if Lake didn't foresee such a strong current against her. And I mentioned history. We've all heard the maxims. He got the joke.
Lake, current, get it?
Thank you. Where's the drum kit? Thank you. We heard the maxims. Midterm is a referendum on the sitting president, but for a rare exception, the party in power gets anywhere from a drubbing to a shellacking. Lauren Mayk, and any of you can follow up, of course, how did the Democrats have a pretty good, not so terrible night?
Well, this is a question that I've been asking people the past 2 days or day and a half, or however long we are into this at this point. So, and from talking to other people, I don't necessarily think there's one answer to it. There are a number of factors. I think one of them is the abortion issue, that some people wondered maybe the enthusiasm from that we saw during the summer may have worn off. The inflation issue was big. We saw that in polls. But when you look in specific states, you can definitely see an impact. In Michigan, for example, which happens to be the state that I grew up in, abortion actually was on the ballot. You hear a lot of candidates saying abortion's on the ballot. It actually was in Michigan. And so that drove a lot of turnout there for people coming to vote on that. And then, of course, voting in the governor's race and in everything else. And they had a state house flip there as well, which was significant. And then in Pennsylvania, we saw from NBC News exit polls that abortion was the top issue for people in Pennsylvania, which was not the case nationally. In the same NBC News exit polls, it was number 2 under inflation, but it was number 1 in Pennsylvania. And then the other thing that I'll say before I pass it along to everyone else is, we mentioned the Trump effect, and certainly there are a number of candidates who were associated with former President Trump, and that was a very good thing for them in the primary. Here in Pennsylvania, that was the case, certainly for Dr. Mehmet Oz, helped him across the finish line in the primary, but not necessarily as good of a thing for them in the general in states like Pennsylvania. And Oz really in the final push was really trying to make the case for himself as more of a moderate, talking about balance, talking about fighting extremism, and it was made difficult by the fact that he had this association with former President Trump and had a rally the very weekend before. So I personally have wondered what might have happened if he had started to make that case earlier in the election cycle. But anyway, those are some of the factors. I don't think there's just one.
So, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very complex election in a lot of different ways. It wasn't very monolithic, and each result was different. The polling, as I mentioned earlier, was just plain off. The economy, inflation, and crime were polling higher before Election Day, but the telling thing is where the most detailed exit polling was taken, Michigan and Pennsylvania, abortion spiked. And I had an opportunity on the way here tonight to talk to the Lieutenant Governor-elect for Pennsylvania, and I asked him why he thought that was the case. And what he said was, people know that prices are high, but they know that eventually they will come down. They believe that the economy will eventually get better. They're not exactly sure who to blame for it now. But when you take into account things like democracy being on the ballot, as President Biden said in the weekend before the election, and direct assaults as they perceive them to be on democracy, and the abortion issue and women's reproductive rights being taken away, that heightened the intensity of the vote for the voters in those that care most about those issues. So they came to the polls. Perhaps it's interesting. Everybody the electorate seemed to be mad at something. But yet, by and large, except for a couple of pockets around the country, it was a good night to be an incumbent. Normally, when people are mad, that means radical change. And that didn't manifest itself as largely as I think we all expected it to. So all of those things together helped stem the rumors of that red wave. to make it but a ripple. And it empowered Democrats to what could have been and should have been by polling a really bad night translated into living to fight another day for the Democratic Party. It does look like that they will likely lose Congress. But by and large, when you look across the country, actually it was basically the Democrats and Republicans almost battled themselves to a stalemate.
Can I say one more thing on the abortion issue too? And I wonder, and this is going to potentially influence how I do interviews too, I wonder if some of what we got from some of those polls early when compared with the exit polls was how the questions were asked. Because when you ask people, what's the biggest issue for you right now? What's the biggest thing facing your family? What's your number one thing? You know, a lot of people are going to say, gosh, things are expensive and, the cost of things, inflation, the economy. But when you ask them, what did you vote on? What was the thing that you voted on? Then you get things like, I voted on abortion, or I voted on, keeping the house or taking the house or whatever. So I wonder if part of it is how we ask the questions ahead of time.
I saw a poll before Election Day, about a month ago, and it generally asked, what do you care about? Right. And then it specifically asked, it took two. Took the economy and inflation as one, and abortion as the other, and said, what motivates you? And actually at that time, and this is why I say it was a bad night to be a pollster, the economy and inflation was 2 to 1 over abortion but a month ago. So I think things did change. The interesting thing about this election was there was a growing red tsunami as well, and then along comes the Dobbs decision. And if this election were held in August or July, I think it would have been a Democratic romp. But over time, as inflation didn't get any better and the economy did continue to suffer, people returned back to that. So, as I said, this election it was very complex in its outcome.
When I hear you say that, Lauren, it makes me think that people are taking the long view when they go and vote, right? The economy will get better, prices will go down, things will normalize at some point. So when I have my vote in my hand, I want to take the long view. And I'm angry, but I think people are angry and they're also scared. This has been a really crazy few years. It seems like such a simple, obvious thing to say, but it's worth saying that. Again, 8 years ago, would you have imagined that the country is the way it is, that the war is happening, that Roe was overturned, that the pandemic happened, that we can keep going? I think people are just nervous. And so the incumbents winning, the candidates that seem a little bit closer to center, and in many cases, that was the Democrats, because the Trump effect on the primaries put in Republican candidates who were operating more of an extreme and perhaps less experienced type of candidacy. And so I think we saw people pull to calm, take the long view, and maybe vote with anger, but also a sense of fear in their view.
On the flip side, there are certainly people on the other side of the abortion issue who were happy about the Dobbs decision and who don't want abortion rights, reproductive rights extended. And inflation is a very real thing. Gas prices affect almost everybody. Crime was a huge issue in this election. So is it just a matter of the abortion issue winning out over those others, or is there some kind of systemic problem with the Republican Party in the way the issues were presented to the voters?
Well, it's been interesting to me talking to voters about the issues that are important to them and whether they think the people they are voting for can do anything about it. I had a conversation with someone recently who was saying that that the economy and that inflation, that they were the top things, and he was voting Republican. And I said, I think we were talking about the Senate races. I said, do you think Dr. Oz is going to be able to do anything about those prices? He said, no. But that's what he said he was voting on. Then a few minutes later, I had a conversation with somebody who said, was talking about crime, and crime was very important to him. He lived in Bucks County. Actually, I was in Bucks County. And he was talking about crime in Philadelphia. And he said crime in Philadelphia is terrible. And I said, he was also voting Republican. He was voting for Dr. Oz. I said, do you think Dr. Oz will be able to do anything about crime in Philadelphia? He said, yes. He said, well, he can get rid of Krasner, which a senator cannot do. But so it's been interesting to me that, sometimes people say they're voting on something and you get different responses of whether or not they're really going to hold the candidates they're voting for responsible for that.
So it really should have, if the election were around the economy, inflation, and crime, that's a recipe for Republican victory right there. Going back to a bygone era, although a Democrat capitalized on the economy in 1992, it's the economy, stupid, that Jim Carville gave to Bill Clinton at the time. If that were the focus and that were the case, then, as I said, the Republicans would have likely romped. What I think the phenomena is exactly what was just said. That yes, we know that inflation is high, and yes, we know that the economy is not as healthy as we'd like it to be. But whose fault is it? And I don't think the Republicans effectively portrayed the Democrats and or Joe Biden in particular, or by extension Tom Wolf here in Pennsylvania, as being responsible for the problem. They yelled about the problem, but didn't tell you who was responsible for it. That was an important component missing, I think, from the game plan, from the overall national game plan of the RNC in being able to convey that very clearly.
I agree.
We might have dismissed as pure political bluster or BS hearing Speaker Pelosi say in the run-up to the election that Democrats have far superior candidates and will do much better than anyone expects. But Nancy was right, at least on her latter point. But as for her first, that candidate superiority, if we could look at that through a lens of election deniers, a CBS News analysis found that this cycle, among 596 Republicans running, 308, or 52%, have raised doubts about the validity of Joe Biden's win over Donald Trump. Lauren, we're supposed to be this shining city on the hill, this beacon of democracy for the lesser lands. How does the world view us, and does this midterm move the needle in any way?
I think the world is worried about us. There was a recent poll in Japan and Australia that said 75% of Japanese people and Australians viewed the midterm elections in the United States as very important for their own country. Our turnout for our own midterms is less than 50%. They're worried. And they look at the United States, whether gladly or not, as the leader of the free world, the biggest power, and they need the United States to lead. And in order to lead, we have to be stable and we have to be reliable. And when we are fighting and accusing our own electoral process of being insufficient, of being filled with lies, and that turmoil goes on for years and years, it erodes the faith that people have in our country to not only lead ourselves, but to lead the free world. And that's been going on for quite a while, certainly in the withdrawal of Afghanistan and in the Dobbs decision. The rest of the world is saying, what? You had this law in the books for 50 years? And most of the American population supports things as they are, and it can just get turned over like that? We're very confusing to people right now, and they're concerned, and they watch the midterms very closely, and will continue to watch to see what the outcome will be until December 6th, and are waiting to see if those election deniers emerge again, and if they're given any credence or credibility when they do.
And at the same time, we're, in the media anyway, celebrating 50% turnout in this midterm. That's a good number for midterms. Not as good as 2018, but healthy.
Right. When we go to other countries and we say we're going to teach you how to build a democracy, there's a pause.
Well, I'll put in a plug for my home county of Bucks. We were 65% turnout. And
Presidential level, right there. It is.
It was very robust. As I said earlier, I think it was a bad night for election deniers across the country. And look, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. And the reality is that the history of our nation, there has never, ever, ever been a flawless election in our history. Are there shenanigans? Are there things that happen? Yes. But we have to look at whether or not they affect the ultimate outcome. And none of them have ever affected the ultimate outcome. So I think we have to put it in perspective and recognize the fact that if we don't agree with a decision, look, I will tell you, as a recovering politician, there are many times that I didn't necessarily agree with the decision of the electorate, but I respected it, I honored it. And I think that's the type of men and women that we need involved in the electoral process today. People who have enough integrity to be able to stand up and say, okay, I ran the hardest race I could, and you know what? I wasn't successful. What's next for me? I think that's the very basis of who and what we are as Americans, and this system of representative democracy demands that level of maturity.
Does the big lie and the candidates who support it just go away, fizzle out? I mean, remember, January 6th happened, threatened to hang the Vice President of the United States.
And others. I would say this about that. I think one of the takeaways I would hope for the Republican Party is they need to be more intentional about candidate recruitment. Message matters, yes. Issues matter, yes. But ultimately, it is the candidate as well that needs to be a person of certain qualities, certain values, certain responsibilities, and as I said before, personal integrity. That needs to be part of the process as well. So I think that the Republican Party really needs to spend time with how it evaluates its candidates. I mean, for the first time ever that I can remember, well, not ever, but for the first time certainly in my adult life, the Republican State Committee here in Pennsylvania chose not to make a recommendation to the Republican electorate, chose not to endorse a candidate for governor. And I think that aided in Senator Mastriano ultimately becoming the nominee. Part of, I think, the obligation of a party is to be able to recommend to the members of that party who it is that they feel has the best credentials in order to be successful, yes, in the primary, in order to be successful, yes, in the general election, but ultimately, who is best able to govern? Because that's really what it's supposed to be all about. So I think that candidate recruitment process really needs to be looked at on the Republican side.
Two things. One question I have about that, and I've wondered the same thing, whether this will spur Republicans to get more involved in that primary process. But when you're talking about getting more involved and sort of being intentional about who they choose, I wonder if they also need to sort of have examples and have evidence that going in maybe a more moderate direction will work for them, because the example that they have recently in Pennsylvania is former President Trump. And then I was really interested in the race in, I think it was Colorado, where there was a more moderate Republican who was running there, and he did not win. And there was sort of some talk about, well, gosh, could this be another model? Could he be, successful? And then, the other thing though that you said, will they go away? And does that go away? I wonder a lot about, well, then what happens to all those people, all of those supporters? They don't go away. And we have gone through this, I don't even know what to call it. We've gone through this period of time over the past 10 years where people have sort of gone into their silos. They have the media available to them that is specifically targeted to them, that is feeding them misinformation, disinformation, and they have bought it. And I've talked to people at Trump rallies. I've talked to people, at political events who believe things that are just simply not true. And I wonder, okay, yes, so you change the candidates. Republicans, let's say, change their candidates. Does that mean that those people drop? What happens to those people? Does that mean that they're going to say, okay, well, we'll vote for this person now? Does it mean that they drop out of the political process? I don't know what the answer is, but I wonder a lot about it, because when you spend time talking to people and you realize all of these people are out there and they've all been sold a bill of goods that's not true, I don't know how you unwind that.
So,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that that's been a struggle for my entire adult life.
It's deepened as you've gotten more media that's been specifically targeted to them, and Facebook and.
Well, right. I mean, one of the challenges to the overall electoral process is this. We are provided the news that whoever the algorithms tell those that have the different Facebook or whatever it might be that we want to hear. The challenge for us is as electors, as voters, is to watch MSNBC and Fox and discern for ourselves, is to seek different points of view and then formulate your own opinion. That's what representative democracy demands, an informed electorate who makes their decision to make the decisions in order to, as George Will said, we don't make the decisions on solving the issues. We pick the people who make the decisions on solving the issues. So we have to be fully informed in order to make an intelligent choice. The more one side is driven, the more polarized things become. So we as responsible voters need to break that cycle by actively seeking other points of view, even if they are foreign, even if they are alien and repugnant. At least exposing yourself to them and understanding, I think, is incumbent on all of us.
And with all the caveats about polling, in the wake of the election, there was a poll that found of the people who identify as Republicans, about a third of them say they are Trump first Republicans. And Jimmy made the point that the Republican Party needs to do a better job of recruitment. We have I think a fine example of a great Democratic candidate in Josh Shapiro, now governor. Pretty centrist, wide appeal, smart guy. I know you're a recovering politician, but do you know of Republicans in the pipeline who might be able to go up against him? We've had 2 Republican candidates go down to defeat in Pennsylvania.
The Republican Party certainly doesn't suffer from a bench of very able people. Certainly as we sit here tonight, we're still talking about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party having a majority. That means there's over 100 people in the House of Representatives that have the Republican tag. There are, I guess it's going to be at the end, 28 state senators. There are multiple Republican candidates in municipalities all across this state. We have 2 statewide elected officials who are Republican in Tim DeFore, the state treasurer, the auditor general, and Stacey Garrity, the state treasurer. I think that the Republican Party does indeed have a bench, but I think right now, let's let Governor-elect Shapiro take the oath of office and articulate a vision before we decide who's going to run against him 4 years from now.
Well, speaking of 2024, let's talk about where this leaves both parties. Let's tackle the Trump effect a bit more. Should he remain the party's standard bearer. And of course, I asked this after Ron DeSantis had a really impressive, decisive win in the Florida governor's race, the first Republican to win majority Hispanic Miami-Dade County. Overall, he outperformed Trump in every Florida county. He seems to have been anointed the next. Do you agree?
About Ron DeSantis being the next?
And Trump fading, perhaps.
I think that those are decisions that are going to have to be made in the Republican Party. I mean, there's a lot of decisions that are going to have to come in the next, really in the next couple of days, first of all, to see whether or not he announces, and then to see whether he gets involved in the Georgia race. And I think that is, to me, that's one of the signs that I will look for, is whether or not he gets involved in that Georgia race, to see if people in his circle say, don't do it. Whether he remains he's still going to be a player in some way. There's no way that that's not going to happen, because he's going to keep speaking, and he has a very large base of people. It just might not be a base that's large enough to win a general election in a state like Pennsylvania.
I think, too, when we look at Trump, part of his brand is that he goes rogue. He does whatever he wants. He says whatever he wants. He leads. And if the decision is not to support Trump within the party for the next presidential candidate, he will have to publicly fall in line in order for his following, the 30% or so that are Trump first candidates, and swing that behind, let's say, DeSantis. I think there's a legitimate question. Is Trump willing and able to do that and sustain that for very long? It's a very high-risk proposition to have Trump stumping for you from behind and imagine that he'll stay there.
And one more thing on that in terms of what happened in Pennsylvania, that I think is potentially a lesson going forward, is that I think one of the things that the Republican Party lost in this cycle is the ability to have that sort of unified ticket and to push that and to all kind of work together. I mean, I had conversations with a couple of candidates who didn't want to tell me whether they were supporting the top of the ticket, and they were running on the Republican ticket. And in one of them, the interview had been set up by the RNC. So that was a disadvantage to the Republican Party, that they weren't able to campaign the way the Democratic Party was able to campaign, in terms of everybody getting behind people, your county parties getting behind people, and pushing out that message for everyone, and having to have a back and forth with me about that issue instead of about some other issue. So if there is still a sort of divide in the party over Trump, that creates that same kind of phenomenon.
That picture over the weekend in Philly of Biden, Obama, Fetterman, and Shapiro all holding hands with these huge politician smiles. Could that happen on the Republican side?
Well, it did. I mean, not exactly, but yeah. I mean, they had the Trump rally, but I'm talking about all the way down.
Exactly.
All the way down the ticket.
Yeah.
And he's already called Ron de-sanctimonious, which could have used a little more workshopping, I think. One of my favorite Trump quotes came just ahead of the election on News Nation. He said, well, I think if the Republicans win, I should get all the credit. If they lose, I should not be blamed at all. Which is, to me, the same thing as saying before the election in 2020, if I win, it'll be legit. If I lose, it'll be stolen. All right, let's talk about Democrats, because they have a potential issue, I would say, in a man who is going to turn 80 in just a matter of days, Joe Biden. Happy birthday. Do we really think he's going to run again? And if not, who should for the Democrats?
I think whether he runs again will be in part determined by whether Trump runs. Just the way he's talked about things in terms of being the guy who beat him before, and the only politician, he actually said that in an interview, that he's the only person who has beat him. I think that's a factor.
Think if Trump runs, Biden will want to?
I think it's more likely that he will run if Trump runs.
I wholeheartedly agree with that assessment. As a matter of fact, I do think that President Biden looks at the former president, and President Biden honestly believes that he is the backstop that keeps Trump from being the new Grover Cleveland. The problem in that scenario is that Grover Cleveland, when he lost, actually won the popular vote. I don't know that it's ever been done effectively before or since to come back. It's a very tall order. I do think, having looked at the New York Post in the Trenton train station the day after the election, that they chose to run a very large picture of Governor DeSantis and calling him future. So I think that the New York Post, which of course has a conservative leaning, is already weighing in on where it sees the future of the Republican Party. So from the perspective of President Biden, look, it is hardly a secret that there are those who very much in his own party don't want him to run again. And I think that those discussions and those arguments will be made perhaps easier and more palatable to the president if, in fact, President Trump isn't running.
We've seen some more unique Republican candidates not succeed in this race against more centrist Democrats. So if it's not Trump and it's DeSantis, and he's still, is he viewed as volatile? These days it's hard to put people on the continuum anymore. But, Bernie Fetterman kinds of folks will need to come into center if the Republicans do the same. It's almost like a game of chicken to see how far out or how close in the candidates should be.
So some names for Democrats: Vice President Harris, Buttigieg, anybody catch your eye?
Well, I know Pete. We were Rodell Fellows together at the Aspen Institute. He is wicked smart, but I don't know if he is going to be able to coalesce enough people around. A sitting vice president with a willing exiting president is a very hard thing to overcome for any perspective, lack of a better term, outside candidate. So that is a challenge. It depends on whether or not, if we suppose that President Biden decides to not run, then we have to determine how real is the relationship between the president and the vice president. Was it a political marriage of convenience, or is it actually something substantial? If it is, that pretty much will make it very difficult for anybody else to even be considered. But if the answer is no, then I think it's open season for a whole bunch of different folks.
Right, and the Democrats right now look like the more stable party, and that's good for them. And people they're scared, they're nervous, they're anxious, right? And so if the Republicans are sort of spinning around trying to figure this out, we hold the line. And so what Jim just said, I think, makes sense. If it's not Biden and it's not Harris, then the Democrats look messy as well. And I think we lose that particular comfort that makes people want to vote for the Democrats.
Yeah, no reason to rush in now. Kayleigh McEnany, Trump's one of his press secretaries, said, hold off, don't make your announcement on the 14th or whenever he was scheduling it. She said, let's figure out what this Senate race in Georgia, the runoff in Georgia, is going to do. All right, let's take some audience questions, please.
I have a question that pertains to the, how do you say, S show that existed when Gingrich took over and poor old Boehner attempted to keep control of the Tea Party within his Republican caucus. So assuming that McCarthy is the speaker of a very slim majority, what kind of an S show or something else do you all foresee playing out within that group, and how can any governance occur from them?
It certainly is going to make it difficult in terms of getting agreement, because there are, obviously a lot of different factions in the Republican Party, and, you have sort of the Trumpier faction that may have certain things they want in order to get things through. One of my questions about that is sort of how, whether it's Kevin McCarthy or whether it's somebody else, how they would handle that and what their options would be. I don't know whether they would go this route, but one of the things I wonder about is something, we've talked a lot about Bucks County, this panel, but Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick is involved in the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan group. It's the same number of Democrats as Republicans, and they tend to move together on legislation. At least that's the idea. And I wonder if legislating or governing is not possible with, certain far-right members of the Republican Party, whether there might be sort of deals struck with something like the Problem Solvers Caucus that, could you bring your Democratic members over to do this? I don't know whether something like that would work, but that's just sort of one of the questions I have about an option that a future Republican speaker might have.
It's unfortunate that too often, the Lauren Boeberts of the world, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world are the loudest voices in that room. But yeah, Brian Fitzpatrick, we're lucky to have. He is rated the most bipartisan member of Congress by the Lugar Center and Georgetown.
I read that on
any.
his campaign signs.
Yeah.
It was a very large campaign sign.
I'd run on that if I were him.
So
Well, and that sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
yeah, that's true too. So look, we're talking about the Republicans as if they're the only ones that have a gradation problem of extremism. We haven't mentioned some of the far left-leaning members of the Democratic caucus who have taken their votes on the road from time to time because the legislation wasn't progressive enough for them. That's exactly what the problem solvers are all about, trying to shoot that gap and help to make that turn. And in fact, the problem solvers were instrumental in the transportation bill.
Yeah, I couldn't remember there was a piece of legislation. It wouldn't have passed without those
without the problem solvers, exactly. And Pennsylvania has at least three that I'm aware of. Chrissy Houlihan in Pennsylvania 6, Brian Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania 1, and Dan Muser, who I can't remember his number, but up in the Northeast.
Used to have others. Charlie Dent was,
Charlie was
and
a member.
Tom MacArthur.
Right. MacArthur over in New Jersey. Right. So we have people who understand, who get it, who are willing to move the process along. And Brian, for one, I've not looked at the results of the other two, but Brian, for one, had a very good night in what we had talked about earlier. And look, I talk about Bucks County because I live there. It's not exactly rocket science, but there was a mixed bag in Bucks County as well. But Brian did very well in what is primarily a district that is made up almost entirely of that county.
I think his Democratic challenger, Ashley Ehas, is a great candidate. She's a veteran attorney, very smart. I think she'd be good in elected office, but going up against Brian Fitzpatrick, it's tough. Another question, please. Yes. Hold on for the microphone 1 sec, please. Thank you.
This is terrific. I want to share something lighter than I have the question. I try to listen to CNN. I read the Wall Street Journal. I try to read different sources. On a lighter side, it's because of Donald Trump, I now read Karl Rove, and I never read Karl Rove before. But I think I have two questions for you. One of them is, in this Pennsylvania election, I always remember the Ed Rendell philosophy. He would visit every single county in the state. And people say, why are you wasting your time when counties are going to lose? He said, first of all, I'll get 25 or 30% of the vote rather than 20, but believe it or not, I'll hear some good ideas all over the state. Can you comment a little bit more about what Fetterman did in reference to that? And then second of all, about who might run if it's not Biden and Trump. Karl Rove talked about on both sides, there's some, besides, DeSantis, there's some really great governors in a lot of these different states that really know how to govern. And I think if both of those leaders are not running or whatever, it could change things. But go ahead, please.
So you are exactly spot on. That is the secret to, at least in my opinion, I think what we will find, and my cursory look of the vote totals across the state, that was how John Fetterman beat Mehmet Oz. It was by going to every county, and by the way, Josh Shapiro did this as well, but by going to every county and doing just a little bit better in most of the counties than President Biden did. A county where President Biden might have carried 52%, Fetterman carried 53, 54. A place where President Biden lost by 46, Fetterman was only losing by 48%. So it was that sort of intentionality on his part to go everywhere and to work with the party structure and the volunteers that he was able to build as well that made the difference, that he reset the model, if you will. And I think the other thing when talking about John Fetterman, let's face it, folks, Pennsylvania is parochial. We are parochial as a state. We're parochial as regions. And John Fetterman was able to portray Mehmet Oz as a carpetbagger, as somebody who just never lived here before, had somewhat the added value of being true. And it was, but he did live here for a time, but it hadn't been for quite some time. And that, I think, that parochialism, I think, inured to Senator-elect Fetterman's favor now as well. Your second question was? My second question is looking at. Yes. Well, you're right. There are several different potential candidates. Governor Youngkin in Virginia, Governor Noem in, I always get it wrong, is it South Dakota? It's one of the Dakotas, forgive me, but she came to some prominence for the way her state handled the pandemic. There are obviously right in his own state, Senator Rubio has previously run and perhaps might be interested in running again. There are, I don't think there will be an absence of choice on the Republican side if it is not Donald Trump or for some reason is not Ron DeSantis.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much. Before I move to my question, I'm a little bit tempted to comment on Lauren Swartz concern what the world is thinking about the results and the rhetoric of the U.S. elections. Well, we have a pretty international group here in the room now. We come from more than 10 European countries. I can't speak on behalf of the world, but I can say that I come from Bulgaria. It's a small Balkan country, and yes, we are concerned because this rhetoric is being easily imported everywhere. So fairly talented politicians easily adopt topics such as abortion, such as concerns about the legitimacy of elections, some things that were not the case just a few years ago. And these discourses both stimulated by Russian propaganda, but also by some groups linked to conservative American players. So yes, we are concerned and we really hope that more sanity will prevail. But my next question is to everyone, but it's referring to Mr. Cayley's comment about algorithms. I mean, we are all very concerned that people live in their own bubbles. They are not informed by professional news. At the same time, do you think that on US level more effort is taken in order to achieve more transparency in the way that tech companies work and shape public opinion, whether we like it or not? Maybe the others can also comment on that.
Well, I think that discussion is being had, needs to be had, but my comment was really beyond that. We should be investigating the way in which information is put out, but we all know as rational human beings, we know we're being sent curated material that those who are sending it to us believe it is that we want to see. Our challenge, our responsibility, is to break that cycle by seeking other information sources, by not necessarily saying, oh, look, everybody in these articles agree with me, I must have the superior answer on X question. Seeking out the other side, I think, is absolutely an important part of being a responsible voter in a representative democracy.
And there is a role for candidates to play in that as well.
Agreed.
On several levels. Obviously, not feeding people incorrect information would be the primary one. But just, when you're talking about the silos and talking about different kinds of news, I work for a local news station. Your sort of mainstream, regular old news. And if candidates choose not to talk to me, not to do press conferences where they might be on our air, that is going to push their supporters farther into those silos. But if, Doug Mastriano, for example, were to do an interview with me, then all of a sudden his supporters are going to start, they might want to see that. And so then they're going to be exposed to other news by doing that. And so there's a role that candidates play in that as well.
And the people who live the most in the silos, as we see, are often young people. I have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, and that skill of I must watch and read different news sources, and I know how to go find them, right? When I grew up, there were all these magazines on the table and all these different newspapers and the library. It sounds practical, but it is, right? They watch me reading the news, and it looks the same no matter what. They can't see, earbuds in, they don't know. And so they get their news out. TikTok is the place that most young people go to first to ask any question about, should I kiss the boy on a date and who's going to win the presidential election? Same source. And so if Mastriano or anybody is focusing their messaging there, and that's how people are growing up, I think it's something very significant to be concerned about. And we need to do everything we can to help expand the minds and the tools and the evaluation skills for reading what's coming through on our phones, and we are not there yet. Now, we saw massive young turnout on this midterm election, which is encouraging, but I wonder, where did they get their news? And the generation behind them, digital natives, TikTok natives, which is even more, what will they think about how to approach the world? And do they watch local news? And do they read the newspaper? I don't think so.
We'll be doing a TikTok dance following this portion of the evening. And as if Twitter weren't already a flaming cesspool, now that anybody can buy a verified account, I saw just this afternoon someone's pretending to be Eli Lilly and saying insulin is now free and getting thousands of amazed reactions. Oh, this is fantastic. Yeah, it would be, but it's not true. And just one more thing. We have time for just one more question. I apologize, but we have one in the back. If our microphone can stretch, please.
Thank you. It's so important to have an educated electorate when you look at candidates. Where is a good source to find that information? I remember growing up, and the newspaper in the city where I grew up covered all of these races and allowed candidates to give statements. It's very difficult to find that now, where the Philadelphia Inquirer doesn't really cover the more local races. Do you have recommendations for that?
I think the first answer is not just one, which you just touched on there. To have the multiple. Are you talking about where to get the ultra local, because those still do exist in some local newspapers at the county level and that sort of thing. They do yeah. It is harder. It is harder. Yeah. But I think the answer is multiple.
Yeah, I think that's right as well. It is depending on what the race might be, and as somebody who used to answer some of those questions about whatever the issues were of the day, I always appreciated as a candidate that opportunity because there wasn't a filter between me and the people that I wanted to convey a message to. I would write down what it is I wanted to say in a voter guide, and people could read it. They could either agree with it or not, but at least I knew that in my own words, I had articulated where I wanted to be. We seem to be getting away from that more. The other phenomena that I am growing concerned about is this whole game with debates. In that some will debate some, others won't debate others. I'm too far ahead. I can only lose. We should expect, as part of our system, we should expect that the candidates are able to meet one another in a debate-style format and articulate their individual visions on the issues of the day. That is another way that helps inform voters. But as Lauren said, right now, you got to surf the internet to get to finding those sorts of answers that you're looking for.
It's interesting that you also said that one of the things you appreciated about it was there's no filter, because that's the same thing that some candidates are saying now about social media, that's why they like that, because there's no filter. They don't.
that.
I don't get a chance for a follow-up question. Is basically what they're saying. But they then are relying on that to be the only way that they are reaching people, just through that. And I've made the case to candidates on both sides that not everybody follows your guy on Twitter. So, yes, you're getting your message out unfiltered on Twitter, but only to the people following him.
I think the comment on debates that you made, Jim, is critical. If I want our president to go debate with or talk to Putin about this war in Ukraine, or to bring Brittany Griner home, I want to make sure you can stand up and do it, and have a conversation and take the heat with these world leaders. This face-to-face is coming with President Xi, and we need to know that our elected officials can have those conversations and have the rhetorical strength to do it. It is a critical job skill. It's like going in to have a job that requires you to run and being like, well, I don't think I need to run in order to do this job interview. I think I don't know how to change that or get them to do it, but I think it is imperative.
And critical for our very democracy that they do it. And I think candidates who refuse should be lesser in our minds. It should be a strike against them. I share your same criticism, especially when it comes to judges. Like, I don't just like voting straight party. I like to know who I'm voting for and why. It is so hard to find information about a judge's philosophy. Sometimes the bar associations can help with that, but it shows the importance of local newspapers and hyper-local newspapers like the Daily Local or the Delco Times. Those are the places where you can get that information, and those papers are becoming few and far between. League of Women Voters does those candidate surveys. Ballotpedia, which is a Wikipedia-esque website, so take that grain of salt, but they contact candidates, have them fill out questionnaires. Axios, which is now in Philadelphia, did that this cycle. I'm sorry. The Committee of 70, yes, great resource in Philadelphia, but if you're not in Philly, you're looking out in the suburbs. Yeah, right. And so write to your local newspapers and tell them that's the kind of thing that you want to see, and also, beg the Lenfest organization and all these other philanthropists to fund local news, because it is very important. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to Lauren, to Jim, to Lauren for being here. You can catch up with them after the fact, but thanks for your presence and sweet dreams.
Thank you, everyone, once again for being here. Thank you to KYW News Radio for hosting us and for partnering with us, to our panelists and moderator. We hope you enjoyed tonight's program. We encourage you to stick around. We have some food and drinks. Continue to network, ask good questions, and engage with one another, because that is why we are here tonight. Please also, if you find the time, remember to take a follow-up survey, which you'll find in email and or on the council's website and in the program book. That allows us to understand what topics are important to you to continue to deliver programming like tonight that matters to you. And so please make sure to check that in your follow-up emails. Thank you again, and thank you, everyone.